Good morning. Welcome to episode 59 of Duval Rundown. My name is Gus Logue. Today, as I am on every Thursday, I'm joined by Mia O'Brien. Today, we're going to talk about Jacksonville's coaching search. They do have a new head coach, their 8th full-time head coach in franchise history, and Liam Coen, secured to a 5-year contract, according to reports. But Liam, the number one task for him is building out his staff, and it starts with defensive coordinator, as he said, but obviously offense coordinator. We're going to run through a couple other position coaches that could be filled as well. Frankly, I think we're expecting to hear who the defensive coordinator is. It could be breaking at any moment, but it could break at next week. We'll see. But defensive coordinator will probably be the first domino to fall. But Mia, how's it going? Welcome back.
Hey, it's happy to be back, Gus. Thank you to everyone who joined us. It's wild to think it was 1 week ago today. We had one of our highest rated ever Duval Rundowns. And then we had another impromptu Duval Rundown the next day on Friday, which also turned out to be pretty high rated because an absolutely chaotic last week and a half for your Jacksonville Jaguars. But we're excited to finally have the head coach in place. Today's episode is kind of going to be a bit more like if you were here for our Fix Your Franchise episode. We're going to go through the names that we know, and then we'll kind of go through the names that Gus and I think best for your Jacksonville Jaguars on the offensive and defensive side of the ball when it comes to Liam Cohen's first coaching staff, which, when we did that Fix Your Franchise episode, I look pretty smart after that episode. So hopefully I look just as smart after this one, Gus.
Totally. No, you look very good based on just what's happened after that episode. But we're going to start off
once again for unfortunately, Gus, the second straight week. I do want to give the disclaimer. At some point during today's episode, I'm going to get a text from the wonderful folks, our friends, our 1010XL client, Closets by Design, that they are here to take photos of my wonderful new walk-in closet. So free promotion for my friends at Closets by Design. Shout out Francis, Mark, and Lizzie. Lizzie will be here at some point, so I will have to exit stage left briefly to let her into the house, just so you guys are aware.
Hey, shout out to CBD. Yeah, we're going to start out, before we get to all of that, quick Jaguars trivia, of course. According to Liam Coen's father, Tim, who was also a football coach, I think Liam is a third-generation football coach.
Correct.
According to Liam Coen's father, Tim, Liam was drawing up the wishbone offense on a blackboard at what age? Was he 4 years old, 6 years old, 8 years old, or 10 years old when he was drawing up plays on a blackboard? Mia, you have any idea what this one is?
Yeah, the answer is A, 4 years old. I think we need like photo or video evidence. I mean, Liam's 39, so what? He was born, so he's 8 years older than me. So that would put him at 1984, 1985 or something like that. 83 maybe he was born. Something 83, something like that. I mean, they had video cameras, kind of primitive back then. Like, I need the footage of this. I need at least photos of this, 4-year-old child in 1987, just like sitting there drawing up plays on a whiteboard. But it's really cool. And I want to echo something that, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn, but I want to give a shout out to our friend, Coach Campo, the former head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, our colleague at 1010XL, because one thing that he has always, I know, taken an extra point of pride in is guys who not only have grown up in coaching like Liam, where they're second, third, fourth generation, but guys that had to go through the Division II, Division III, low-level FCS schools, go through the grind of moving up that ladder, schools that maybe, as opposed to someone who was a former player and they get transplanted and thrown into the coaching ranks, but they immediately jump to the National Football League because they just wrapped up their playing career. There's something to those guys who've had to grind each and every day and really work for it, just like Coach did. And I know Liam did as well. So really excited to see, because that's another distinct difference, I think, not just between Doug Peterson and Liam Coen, but also I think between the coaching staff that we saw over the last 3 years, largely, not all of the coaching staff under Doug Peterson, but many members of that coaching staff and the coaching staff that I think we could see under Liam Coen.
Absolutely. Well, I should correct myself because the Jaguars did finalize their deal with Liam Coen, but they have finalized a deal with Heath Farwell to retain him as special teams coordinator. So just want to clean up that housekeeping. Heath is back. Not sure how long, but he was extended on his deal, so good to see him back. But I'm just going to run through all of the people that the Jaguars have interviewed so far, both for offense coordinator and defense coordinator, and then we can just kind of go from there. Most recently, for offensive coordinator, they completed an interview with Commanders quarterbacks coach Tavita Pritchard, who previously coached at Stanford for a little bit. Obviously, did great work with Jaden Daniels this season. They also interviewed Rams offensive assistant / passing game specialist Nate Shieldless. Kind of looks like
Shieldhouse.
Shieldhouse.
If you know Shields, the sporting goods store, ironically in Iowa, where Nate Shieldhouse began part of his career outside of Illinois. Shields House.
Gotcha. All right, thank you. So I'm just going to call him Wheelhouse probably, but Shieldhouse, Nate Shieldhouse from the Rams. Obviously, a connection with Liam Coen because Cohen worked on McVay's Rams staff in 2 different stints. And then I think that's the 2 offensive coordinator interviews that they have. And then for defense coordinator, Green Bay Packers linebackers coach / defensive run game coordinator, Anthony Campanile. Campanelli, thank you. I should have looked up some pronunciations before the show.
That's okay. Don't worry. But I already went through this with Lauren Brooks, and I think she was like 0 for 6. So I'm just kidding. But it was there were moments that I was like, no, it's this. So you're good.
Real quick, do you know if there's any connection between Camp and Cohen?
There is indeed, and it may or may not pop up on the coaching staff that I may or may not have outlined for today's episode.
All right, I'll let you get to it. I'm just trying to do a quick run through of everyone. So also at offense coordinator, they interviewed Rams defensive pass game coordinator / assistant head coach. Sorry, this is for defense coordinator, Aubrey Pleasant from the Rams. So obviously that Rams pipeline. Minnesota Vikings defensive pass game coordinator / defensive backs coach, Durante Jones, and Las Vegas Raiders defensive coordinator, Patrick Graham. But Patrick Graham, as reported yesterday, is returning to the Raiders on a new deal to work with Pete Carroll and Tom Brady. So he was out of the running, but we've got 3 official interviews other than Graham, 2 official interviews in the
offense. 4 official interviews. Or no, 3 other than Graham, yes. There's 1 other reported one, yeah.
Yeah, so 3 on defense without Graham, and then 2 on offense. And so, yeah, where do you want to go from here, Mia, in terms of building this staff out?
Oh, where I first want to go, Gus, is I have to let Lizzie in the door. But then we'll kind of run through, as you kind of stall a little bit of time here, we'll run through those 4 candidates because there is a 5th candidate for defensive coordinator, reportedly. Jonathan Cooley, the defensive passing game coordinator under Ejiro Evero with the Carolina Panthers, a longtime Brandon Staley, Vic Fangio guy. That interview request was reported by Jeremy Fowler of ESPN. It has not officially been completed, at least per the team account. And so therefore, we don't have to put him in the conversation, so we can focus on those 3 defensive coordinator candidates in Aubrey Pleasant, Durante Jones, and Anthony Campanelli. And yes, the 2 offensive coordinator candidates are rather fascinating, especially because one of the 2 also interviewed for Liam Cohen's vacant offensive coordinator position that he just departed in Tampa Town. So stick right there. I will be right back.
Okay. Well, I'll talk about Patrick Graham because that's definitely the guy that I know the most about. Even though he's off the market, the reason that I liked him so much is because of his extensive experience. I had a tweet this week showing the past 8 Super Bowls, the defensive coordinators for either Super Bowl team in the past 8 years. And every defensive coordinator except for Robert Saleh and Jonathan Gannon were previously NFL head coaches, or at least had been in the NFL for decades. And so I think that obviously you don't have to stick to that formula in order to make a Super Bowl. That shouldn't be super rigid and only think in one way. But I think that getting a lot of experience at defensive coordinator is important in general, but especially for Liam Coen since he's a first-time 39-year-old head coach. And so for someone like him, obviously he's picked up some knowledge along the way from Sean McVay and Mark Stoops and Todd Bowles of how to run an entire organization. But it's definitely nice to have experienced guys, even though Patrick Graham wasn't an NFL head coach. He's been a coordinator for 6 years in a row, won a Super Bowl in 2008 with the Patriots. He's been around for a long time, and his defenses have been good recently. And so, I was just explaining to the people why I liked Patrick Graham, even if he's off the market. I think that it's important to have a lot of experience. Excuse me, something down my throat. It's important to have a lot of experience at defensive coordinator in the modern NFL to be able to game plan against all the demigod quarterbacks that exist, but especially for a young head coach. And so I'm really interested to dive into these 3 other official candidates and the 1 other unofficial candidate you mentioned, because they're all, Patrick Graham, I think, is only like 46. And so a few of these guys aren't that much younger than him in terms of human years, but in terms of NFL football experience, I think it kind of pales in a comparison. And so that doesn't mean it's going to be a worse hire at all, but it'll just be very interesting to have so many potential young cats in the building.
Yeah, and that's, I know, the knock for a lot of people right now. The 5 candidates that we know have interviewed that are not named Patrick Graham for one of the 2 coordinator vacancies would be first-time coordinators in the National Football League. Now, Durante Jones for 1 year was the defense coordinator at LSU. I know there are those of you who are triggered when I say that because we just got the LSU defense coordinator here, the one who succeeded Durante Jones and Matt House. And look how that turned out. He was the linebackers coach. He wasn't the DC here. But the point being, some of you may be triggered by that additionally, because that 1 year that he was at LSU, that was Ed Ogeron's final season. I don't want to put that on Durante Jones because ultimately, well, I think that the tale and the demise of Eddie O at LSU, a Louisiana legend forever, I think is well documented. Anthony Campanelli also was the co-defense coordinator at Boston College. And so he obviously has coordinator experience, just like Jones, albeit at the collegiate level. And when it comes to Aubrey Pleasant, not so much coordinator experience, but was an assistant head coach the last year for the Los Angeles Rams, including during a preseason game. Sean McVay traditionally allows one of his assistant coaches to be the head coach for that preseason week, including for the actual game. And that staff member who was selected this year was Aubrey Pleasant. And so, well, yes, none of those 3 names, and Jonathan Cooley too, who is the reported name, who has not interviewed, at least as far as we know yet. All of those names do not have coordinator experience in the NFL, which is concerning. Now, I say that, Gus, and I want to note that it's not the end of the world, because you can have the quote unquote old head on staff who is that big brother figure. Think Bob Sutton here with Mike Caldwell 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, when Doug Peterson's first staff was put together. Think about Marvin Lewis last season in Las Vegas, not only to help Patrick Graham on the defensive side of the ball, but also to help Antonio Pierce, a first-time head coach. I don't think it would be that out of the ordinary to have an older veteran guy in the background while it's a first-time OC-DC situation, because that OC-DC may not have experience at the NFL level as a coordinator, but they do at the collegiate level. That's something that Mike Caldwell didn't have, and it's certainly something that, as much as, well, yes, you can say college, NFL, they're so different. I was told by a league source, and I think I said this on a previous episode 2 months ago, go to college and find whatever's coming up next. 9 times out of 10, whatever's being run at the collegiate level is going to be run at the National Football League level in the next 5 to 10 years. These are all dart throws, ultimately. Any hire, head coach, offense coordinator, defense coordinator, drafting players, they're a dart throw. You might as well try a dart throw with someone who A, has juice, and B, youth, and C, maybe that next progressive idea that's going to take the National Football League by storm.
I hear you. And it's funny because, like, Cohen is the guy that got scooped up by McVay because McVay, like, recognized how well he was doing as the offense coordinator and play caller at Maine in 2016 and 2017. And so hypothetically, I'd like to think that Cohen also has that knack to be able to recognize talent at the collegiate level. It'll be interesting.
And by the way, too, Gus, on the offensive side of the ball, those 2 candidates that have completed interviews, Tavita Pritchard and then Nate Scheelhaus, both were coordinators at the collegiate level. Pritchard for quite a few years at Stanford, and then Scheelhaus for 1 season at Iowa State as the official offense coordinator, but previously was the run game coordinator prior to that.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone should be surprised by this list because, as you said, it was kind of to be expected that this, I don't know if you could call it an issue, especially when the staff hasn't even been finalized yet. But just the fact that Liam Coen is a young guy who hasn't had a ton of stops. And so someone asked me on Twitter the other day, like, who's like the Wade Phillips of this, like, defensive coordinator search, especially after Hayes, I think, mentioned like how McVay just was able to hand off the keys to Wade Phillips during their 2018 Super Bowl run. And like, it was kind of Patrick Graham, but now he's with the Raiders. Or you could say Dennis Allen, but now he's with the Saints. Or you could say Robert Saleh, but now he's with the Niners. Or you could say Steve Wilkes, but now he's with the Jets. I feel like all of the older guys that you could kind of quote unquote hand the keys off to are kind of all scooped up already. And I think that it's because of Cohen's experience. Like, he's never had a lot of interactions with a Dennis Allen or a Steve Wilkes before, probably. And so, yeah, I just want to say I don't think the fans, even if they are not, even if they're upset by the lack of experience in these coordinator names, I don't think that they should at least be surprised at all. But let's get into each of these specific names a little bit more. You want to start out with defensive coordinator, since that's probably going to be the first domino to fall anyway.
Yeah, so again, I kind of went through some of those names. Durante Jones has been with a couple different people, or a couple different trees, I should call it. Even worked under Zach Taylor at one point. Obviously, there's a connection between Zach and Liam Coen. Has been with KOC the last year plus, which obviously the rub of KOC also relates back to the Rams. He did have that stint in college. The fun fact of the day is that Durante Jones and the only Bo Valentine, my boyfriend Kevin, he and Durante Jones share an alma mater in Bishop McNamara High School in the DMV area. So, hey, we love the DMV. Who doesn't? They produce a lot of great football players and a lot of great basketball players. So shout out to the DMV. He began his career, though, coaching in college, high school in Louisiana, UCLA, Hawaii, before ultimately finally making it to the National Football League through the Miami Dolphins. And ironically enough, I believe 2016, that would have been Adam Gase. And that was a staff that Ben Johnson was also a part of, coincidentally enough. And then, yes, a part of Zach Taylor's first staff after being retained from the Marvin Lewis staff, to Minnesota in 2020 under Mike Zimmer, then to LSU for a brief year before heading back to Minnesota under Kevin O'Connell.
There you go. Yeah. I mean, the LSU year where he was a defensive coordinator, was that Edo year?
Yeah, that was Edo's final year, and technically Durante didn't call the plays. I read somewhere he didn't call plays until midway through the year, and the LSU defense actually improved throughout the course of the season statistically across the board once he started calling plays. And so I just filed that one away. There were a lot of people just on a quick Google search. When you search his name in LSU, people that were really upset when he was let go, because they're like, well, now we have Brian Kelly and Matt House, and no, we regressed. We should have just kept Durante around a little bit longer.
All right. Now, talk to me about Campanile. Oh my gosh, I completely butchered
It's okay.
that.
He's from New Jersey, and he's a fellow Italian American, so that's why I can say it better than anyone at 1010XL, because we're cut from the same cloth. It's Campanile.
Campanile.
The Campanile name is synonymous with New Jersey high school football. Yes, Campanile. To the point that him and Tua Tagovailoa, when he was coaching in Miami, even though he was on the defensive side of the ball, this is a really good sign, by the way. Him and Tua had a handshake that Tua initiated. It's on video somewhere, I think, from the Hard Knocks season, because Tua wanted to do the Tommy Cutlets before the Tommy Cutlets was a thing. So that kind of speaks to Anthony Campanile, his ability to develop relationships not only in his own meeting room on the defensive side of the ball, but even with guys on the offensive side of the ball. His dad, his uncle, longtime head coaches, the connection to Don Bosco Prep, which even if you're not from the Northeast, you probably have heard of Don Bosco. It's a football factory. It's the St. Thomas Aquinas of the state of New Jersey and the greater metropolitan tri-state area. His dad was head coach there. He was the offensive and defense coordinator. He played at Rutgers under Greg Schiano. He coached at Rutgers under Kyle Flood before being scooped up, heading to Boston College for a brief spell there with Jeff Hafley, then kind of became part of the Jeff Hafley factory, although he did take a little brief detour to Miami, ironically, to work under Brian Flores. A lot of these guys, whether it's Patrick Graham, Durante Jones, Anthony Campanile, have a tie to Brian Flores, which I think says a lot about the type of defense that Liam Coen optimally would love to run. Right. And so Campanile had that brief little detour to BC, then to Miami. But in between his stops at Boston College and Miami, Gus, he did spend one season back in 2019 as the linebackers coach at Michigan. I want to put an asterisk on that because we will be circling back to that, because I don't know if you know, Gus. So that would have been I would call it the first era of Jim Harbaugh, because Jim Harbaugh arrived at Michigan in 2015. He was there until he won the national title last January, in January of 2024. Two eras, because the second era, I would argue his defense was largely dictated by whoever his brother John had coming up in the pipeline in Baltimore and brought them in as his defense coordinator, whether that was Mike McDonald, now the head coach of the Seattle Seahawks, or Jesse Minter, now the defensive coordinator of the Los Angeles Chargers. But prior to that, do you know who Jim Harbaugh's DC was, who hired Anthony Campanile?
Jesse Minter?
Or no, he arrived later. He's part of the second era.
It's not the Seahawks head coach, is it? That's my only other
Nope,
guess.
because that's who I just said. So they were second. They were part of
Right,
the second era.
yeah.
How about Don Brown?
Yeah.
That name ring a bell? Anybody who watched Liam Cohen's introductory press conference on Monday? That ring a bell to anybody? Oh, that's right, because Don Brown was Liam Cohen's boss at Brown. And then after being let go by Michigan, later became the head coach at Liam Cohen's alma mater for 3 years at the University of Massachusetts. So file that one away, folks, for when we actually go through my build a staff here on today's episode. So yes, Anthony Campanelli then reunited with Jeff Hafley after his stop in Miami. The Packers actually outbid the Philadelphia Eagles for his services. They actually added that defensive run game coordinator title because Nick Sirianni really wanted to bring him in. And the Packers said, nah, Jeff wants his guy. We're going to bring him with us and we're going to give him a coordinator title and pay him a whole heck of a lot of money. And so this is a guy who, well, yes, I know the viral clip of him yelling about this, that, and the other, and cussing, and we're going to run through a wall and blah, 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 and dropping F-bombs. I know that that's going to get a lot of play, and he certainly has the juice, but know that this is a guy who, well, yes, he has not been a defensive coordinator in the National Football League yet. He has been in demand as an assistant at both the collegiate and the professional level.
Yeah, the energy is definitely what stands out to me in terms of like what I've seen on the timeline, especially just clips of him in meeting rooms with the Packers and the Dolphins, just being extremely energetic. Or I saw a clip of him coaching on the field too with the Packers. He certainly brings the juice, like you said, but it's really interesting to me that there's multiple like kind of Flores type candidates or kind of candidates from the quote unquote Flores tree, which is super interesting to me because Flores might be the only like person that ended up working out from the Bill Belichick tree because they had so many guys that tried to do the Patriot way at different organizations and it didn't work. I guess it kind of didn't work for Flores in his first head coaching opportunity in Miami.
I think Tua might say something different about it working out or not.
Yeah, but right now I think he's like the fourth best defensive coordinator at the worst. Like he's a great defensive mind, and so it'll be really interesting to see if/when people from his own tree kind of pop up, since he's from the Bill Belichick tree, and then obviously Bill Belichick is from the Bill Parcells tree. And so that's definitely good to hear, though, that they're looking for that type of approach, I think, because like we're kind of promised that by Ryan Nielsen last year, the aggressive and attack mentality. But then when things got difficult and hard, like Nielsen ended up kind of backing up from the philosophy he was preaching and was coaching more conservative play calls and game plans in order to be conservative and like try to not let up big plays. And so it'd be definitely nice to have an aggressive offense or an aggressive defense that matches an aggressive offense.
Absolutely. And while Aubrey Pleasant doesn't necessarily have ties to Brian Flores, I think knowing his time spent with Aaron Glenn, knowing his time spent with Sean McVay, I think you can make the argument that while it may not be as attack style, his personality is certainly just as vivacious and in your face. And so as we wrap up the 3 known interviews that have been completed for defense coordinator, the current Los Angeles Rams defensive passing game coordinator and assistant head coach is certainly another name that I would keep in the conversation as a potential hire for the Jaguars at DC. He also spent some time with Matt LaFleur in Green Bay as a consultant the year after he was let go, or I guess a couple months that he was let go by the Detroit Lions. He began his career with the Washington Redskins with Sean McVay, the National Football League side of his career, I should say, because he too began in the collegiate level as a graduate assistant at Michigan, a defensive backs coach at Michigan before breaking into the league as an intern with the Browns, then linking up with Sean McVay and following him to LA.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. Like, I feel like the LA pipeline makes the most sense because obviously with the Buccaneers, they've already blocked a couple interviews, according to I think Jeremy Fowler, where the Jaguars.
Oh, we're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that too.
Yeah, and so because Liam Coen kind of sort of can't or won't be able to draw as many Tampa Bay assistants as he would like to, even though he probably hired a lot of them and brought a lot of them after Dave Canales, which was a point after Dave Canales was hired by the Panthers in 2024, which I think was a point you originally made. But yeah, so the LA pipeline definitely is an obvious one. But what is this fourth name that is kind of mystery, maybe to be announced defensive coordinator interview?
Yeah, so Jonathan Cooley, he's the secondary and passing game defensive coordinator with the Carolina Panthers. Again, that was reported from Jeremy Fowler. A
Right.
John Carroll guy. For those of you who don't know, John Carroll is like this random ass Division III school in Ohio that produces all this NFL coaching and general manager talent. That's produced the likes of Josh McDaniels, Dave Caldwell. I'm pretty sure Les Snead is also a John Carroll guy. They're like everywhere. As an Ithaca College bomber, I don't understand it and I never will. But it's a credit to them. So Cooley is part of the Ejero Avero, who's the defense coordinator for the Panthers, for those of you who are unfamiliar, Ejero Avero crew. So that was obviously sprung from Los Angeles when Brandon Staley had his 1 year as the defensive coordinator under Sean McVay in 2020. The reason that Brandon Staley was brought into LA was because Sean McVay said the Vic Fangio defense has given me just absolute nightmares for years. I
Yeah.
need to go get someone from that tree. He plucked Brandon Staley. They had the #1 ranked defense that year. And within a year, Brandon Staley was hired away as a head coach across town for the Los Angeles Chargers. But again, I think it speaks to Sean McVay identified the Fangio defense gives me fits. I'm going to go find someone from that tree. So that's where I wonder if, in a similar vein, is Liam Coen saying the Flores defense has given me fits. I need to go out and find someone from that tree, which Jonathan Cooley is not. Again, Aubrey Pleasant is not. Those two are much more tied to the LA familial tree. But at the same time, it once again speaks to that philosophy of what defense has frustrated me for years because I love the way it's
Right.
run. Let me go find someone from there who's the guy who has next.
Yeah, that's a pretty common approach. Like Dan Quinn, I think a major part of the reason that I hired Cliff Kingsbury to be his offense coordinator in Washington is because when Cliff was the head coach at Arizona or with the Cardinals and Dan Quinn was coordinating the Dallas defense, like Cliff would just light him up. And so Dan was like, he's giving me a hard time, so I want him on my staff. So that definitely makes a lot of sense. And I think that even though the Buccaneers and the Vikings did not play last year, I just double checked. I think that that's definitely the way that Cohen is looking at it is like, this is a terrifying defense, and that's the reason that I want it on my staff. It makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And now let's quickly look at those two offensive coordinator candidates a little bit deeper before we go through the staff that I have built for your Jacksonville Jaguars. Hopefully, young Thomas, our intern and digital producer, can like also do another wonderful reel like he did when I was like the list last week. Maybe we could do that again, Thomas. Nate Shieldhouse was the first known interview for the offense coordinator vacancy. Former quarterback at the University of Illinois. So that's actually not a Liam Coen connection. I guess that's a Kahn family connection. Although, let's be real, I don't think the Kahn family requested Nate Shieldhouse. Liam Coen definitively requested him. Began his coaching career at his alma mater, the University of Illinois, in the ops department before getting his first real crack at it with Iowa State as the running backs coach in 2018. Was a part of those Brock Purdy years from 2018 and then all the way through 2023 when he was the offensive coordinator before he too, like Liam Coen once upon a time, was plucked by Sean McVay. There's a really great video story out there. I may be able to link it in the comments and in the chat, so I'll try to put that out there for you guys of Liam Cohen's kind of like tree within the Rams, but it's through the lens of Nate Shieldhouse. Essentially, Sean McVay goes out and he loves to pluck the next up and coming collegiate mind who he believes can translate to the professional level. Whoever that assistant is, he makes it their weekly job to actually sit down with him, go through the game plan and translate that game plan into a technological system where they actually draw out the route tree and they draw out the actual schemes like by hand, and then they transfer it to a computer system. And I don't know if a lot of teams do this, but Sean basically views this as a rite of passage. And so the likes of Zach Taylor, Liam Coen, and now Shane Waldron, and now Nate Shieldhouse have had this honor of being the one who stays up until 1 a.m. on Tuesday nights before practice begins on Wednesday and actually inputs this playbook. And so it's a really great story from Sarah Barsham of ESPN, and I really encourage you guys to check it out. They interview Zach Taylor. They don't interview Liam Coen in it, but they talk about the lineage and quite frankly, all of those guys outside of Nate Shieldhouse, who's currently just a passing game specialist with the Rams, they've all gone on to be at least an OC. Two of them have become head coaches in the National Football League. So I don't want to say that lightning's going to strike a fourth time, Gus, But I believe that even if Nate Shieldhouse, who also interviewed for the Bucs offense coordinator position, even if he's not the future OC here in Jacksonville, he will be an OC at some point in the NFL.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I mean, everyone like jokes around and they're like, "Oh, if you're like ever in the same room as Sean McVay, you're probably going to be hired as a head coach." But I mean, the results speak for themselves. Not only is people from Sean McVay's staff being hired, but they're doing excellent stuff in the NFL as head coaches themselves. And so, yeah, I think that's definitely fair to say that Nate Shieldhouse is going to be an NFL head coach, certainly an NFL offensive coordinator at some point. And so I think that Rams connection definitely makes sense more so for the offensive side of the ball because of what you were saying earlier about the terminology and really being able to get on the same page in terms of not just the culture and kind of the messaging to the players. Obviously, you're going to want to be on the same page with that from day one to be able to kind of have a jump start in terms of being able to build your scheme and then coach it to your players would definitely help out big time.
And so the final known candidate for a coordinator position for your Jacksonville Jaguars who completed his interview last night is Tavita Pritchard, who began his career at Stanford in 2010, spent 12 years in Palo Alto, his alma mater, after playing for the Cardinal from 2006 to 2009 under David Shaw. 2006, 2009, he actually played under Jim Harbaugh, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm doing the math in my head. He would have played under Harbaugh, but he would have been a staffer under David Shaw. Either way, it's good genes. Heard from enough people who speak extremely high, not only of the work he did at Stanford as the OC from 2018 to 2022, but in his 2 years now in the National Football League as the quarterbacks coach of the Washington Commanders. And obviously the work he did alongside Cliff Kingsbury with Jaden Daniels this year speaks extremely high of what his future could be in the National Football League. Once again, another young, progressive mind. And that's what I really appreciate. I know there are those of you who are panicked because you're like, my goodness, this is not, they're not veteran enough. Liam Cohen's a first-time head coach. I need more veteran coordinators. But ultimately, I look at this and I say, if this is where the league is headed, wouldn't you rather have those young, progressive minds in a think tank as opposed to, I don't know, being told that, well, we ran this play in 2017 and it worked and we won the Super Bowl, so therefore it's going to work now.
Yeah. The good thing is that even if these guys don't have necessarily extensive NFL experience, they still have extensive football experience, and a lot of them are like Cohen in that they're from football families. Pritchard, his dad was a starting center at Washington State. His uncle is a former NFL quarterback whose nickname is Jack the Throwin' Samoan Thompson, which is the greatest nickname I've ever heard.
And also that's of note too, by the way, Gus, I don't want to be that guy. But know that the Jaguars have already satisfied the Rooney Rule for both their coordinator vacancies because Nate Shieldhouse is half black and Tavita Pritchard is Samoan.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yes. We have more than solidified it. Maybe that's why they're waiting to announce the coordinator hires because they don't want anybody thinking they jumped the gun again.
I've got a couple of names that I've got floating around my head for the build the staff kind of section.
Yeah.
But first, the first one I want to lead off of is Chip Kelly, because I think there was some rumors that he could, I think just generally be interested in a return to the NFL. I would assume for money purposes, which is fair. And so if Chip Kelly does in fact have interest in returning to the NFL, do you see the Jaguars being able to have the pull to get him into the building for an interview? Do you think that he would be pretty high up on their list? Do you think that they're not considering him at all? I think that if what I've heard is true in that he is interested in returning to the NFL, then he would be a great hire, like mostly for the point that we've been talking about in terms of just experience and specifically NFL experience.
Right, and correct. And this would be a case of if he's the offensive coordinator, there's your old head, there's your veteran who's been a head coach, who's been a coordinator before, who's won a national championship. I also think that, Chip Kelly, and Joe just made the point on our YouTube chat, why would Chip Kelly come to the NFL if he's the OC in name only, if he's not actually calling plays? Joe, the answer is Chip wants back into the league. It's been money. Thank you, Gus. Money. Number two, he has just wanted back into the league for 2-3 years now. he will do whatever it takes to get back to the league, including resigning as the head coach of a Power 4 university, because he believes that by being the offense coordinator of the national championship at the collegiate level, that would make him more marketable for an NFL offensive coordinator job. So I believe that Chip Kelly is in the conversation. And once again, Gus, I'm going to go back to a name that I'm trying to have the exact tie here, because I don't want to speak out of turn on it, but I know that there is a tie somewhere between Don Brown and Chip Kelly. And so therefore, once again, maybe Don comes on as a senior defensive assistant and he says, Chip, would you want to come? But I only think Chip Kelly comes if the Houston Texans do not offer him, which we know his relationship with D'Amico Ryans from when he was D'Amico's coach in Philadelphia. We also know that they are in need of an offensive coordinator that D'Amico Ryans will largely allow to operate in a silo, because he's not going to interfere, because he's the defensive play caller. He will allow you to have autonomy. And so unless the Texans don't offer Chip Kelly and Chip Kelly has no other offers, yes, there will be those who say Ohio State can pay him just as much as the Jaguars could. But I think ultimately he wants to come back to the NFL. And if this is his pathway in, he will take that pathway. And that's the reason I think it's realistic. I don't know if it's 100% reality, just because I do think there will be another team that offers him a play calling opportunity.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for clearing that up. Where do you want to take it? Build your staff, Mia. What do you
baby? All right. Well, let's start with the since I can't pronounce Ermelindo is like calling me out about I've got more intel. I do have some intel. I did get off the phone before we hopped on here, in case you started with us from the beginning and you saw my phone up. So let's start on the offensive side of the ball. A couple of you guys have noted that Jeremy Fowler reported last night that the Jaguars did request Kevin Carberry as their for an offensive line coach interview. He was the assistant offensive line coach in LA when Liam Coen was under the Rams, and Liam Coen brought him to Tampa Bay after he had spent the previous season as the assistant offensive line coach in New Orleans. Now, the Bucs have obviously blocked that opportunity. So if Liam Coen is dead set on bringing his buddy, who clearly has worked wonders in Tampa, given that's now a top 10 offensive line unit after perhaps a mediocre 2 seasons there following that Super Bowl Tom Brady era of the offensive line. And of course, Ryan Jensen getting hurt, Ali Marpet's retirement, that's a whole nother can of worms. Point being, Kevin Carberry worked wonders with that offensive line. As of now, he is being held hostage by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The only way he could come to Jacksonville is if the Jaguars were to request him again with a higher title, with more authority, a title that is higher than offensive line coach. And so I think what's going to be interesting, Gus, is Liam Coen so dead set on getting his offensive line guru in the building that he is okay with requesting him to be his offensive coordinator? It's not out of the norm to have a non-play calling OC who is an offensive line coach. Go back to Sean Payton with Doug Marrone in New Orleans once upon a time.
I was about to say that, yeah.
Go more recently to Mike McDonald in Miami. There were a lot of rumors before Frank Ragnow threatened to kidnap Hank Fraley's family in Detroit this past month. There were a lot of rumors that Hank Fraley was going to follow Ben Johnson, and he was going to be a non-play calling offensive coordinator under a play calling head coach in Ben Johnson in Chicago. So I don't think it would be out of the ordinary to request Carberry to be the OC. At the same time, Liam Coen, folks, he's got a lot of connections. He's got a lot of friends, and he's got a lot of offensive geniuses in different circles that ultimately you have to do what's best for the team and Trevor Lawrence. And you also are playing Tetris right now. And so how can you finagle this where you can bring in all those bright minds into this think tank? And can they actually be in roles that best suit them? And so right now I have Kevin Carberry written as the offense coordinator. I think that's just because he wants to get him in the building. At the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if Shieldhouse or Tavita Pritchard are the hire. I heard great things from someone this morning about Pritchard and what he was able to do, not just in Washington, but also at the collegiate level at Stanford. I'm really fascinated and excited to dive in more into him and what he's been able to bring to those two offenses. But I do think you'll probably hear one more name, although they have fulfilled the Rooney Rule. But don't be surprised if Carberry, they circle back to him, just like the Jaguars circled back to Liam Coen.
Yeah, that was definitely the other name that I had circled in terms of one that I wanted to bring up, because I think that since Liam Coen is set on calling plays, that kind of helps out to be able to bring along an offensive line coach and plug him in as the offensive coordinator. And usually offensive line coaches are like huge helps in terms of coordinating the run game and like calling just which type of run plays during the course of games. And so he'll definitely, even if he was just like the offensive line coach, he would be big in terms of helping Cohen create game plans and stuff like that. So obviously he would have a even bigger influence as offense coordinator. But yeah, as you said, Haley from Detroit, not only was he potentially going to follow Ben Johnson, but he also was interviewed by the Seahawks to be their offensive coordinator. That would have been really interesting because they have Mike McDonald, a young defensive guy, as their head coach. And so to give an offensive line coach the keys would be interesting, even if it is someone as respected as Haley is in Detroit. But I think it does make a lot of sense to go with that route if that is what Cohen chooses, since he is calling plays. I think that makes a world of difference.
So for the sake of time, because I do have another 10:10 meeting at 10 o'clock, LOL, I do want to run through some of these other names on the offensive staff. And yes, Ermelendo, this is where I drop some nuggets. I have on good intel, independent of people here in Jacksonville, that yes. And I think I told you this one, Gus, a month ago when I said if Liam Coen is going to be the next head coach of the Jaguars, you can literally take all your money, swear on your Bible that both Spencer Whipple and Shane Waldron will be here in Jacksonville on staff in some capacity. And I now have that from a third-party independent source that, yes, that is happening. What their roles will be remains to be seen. But Shane Waldron, the longtime Rams assistant who became the Seattle Seahawks offense coordinator and then later the Chicago Bears offense coordinator before being scapegoated by Matt Eberflus and company, he was the one who brought Liam Coen to the National Football League. He began his career in New England as a lowly assistant, went back to college, worked in the collegiate level with Liam Coen in New England. And when Sean McVay, after Shane Waldron had already left for the NFL, worked in Washington for a year with McVay, went with him to LA, and Sean McVay said, I need another young guy. He was the one who said, you should go interview Liam Coen. So not a surprise that Shane Waldron is going to be on this staff. So yes. That I don't think that I'm breaking any news, but I guess I am breaking news because now I have somebody who didn't even know that I knew. And he said, hey, did you know that they're coming? And I was like, yeah, no, I already did. Spencer Whipple is one of Liam Cohen's best friends. You heard that in the social video from the Jaguars social team when he spoke with Christian Kirk. And he said, that's my guy. And Christian Kirk said, that's my guy as well. He's currently the passing game specialist for the Arizona Cardinals. He was the co-offensive coordinator with Liam Coen at UMass. So not a surprise to hear that both those names are all but confirmed and on their way to Jacksonville. Interesting one for me. Very interesting one for me. And Gus, it's why I'm calling it audible on the list. I have heard for a couple weeks now that Jake Peetz, who largely began his career in the scouting department here in Jacksonville before becoming an assistant coach under Mike Mularkey and eventually moving on, came back briefly. He's got like 3 houses in Jacksonville. Have been saying that Peetz, who is currently the passing game coordinator in Seattle, is interested in coming back here. While yes, Seattle's going to have a new offense coordinator in Clint Kubiak. I had somebody tell me this morning, Jake Peetz not coming to Jacksonville. He's probably going to leave Seattle, but he has not been approached by Liam Coen yet. And that's despite him and Liam also sharing that Rams tie. So that's where I had Jake Peetz written in as the passing game coordinator for the Jaguars. But now I look at that and I say, you know what? Even if Nate Shieldhouse isn't the offense coordinator hire, he's only a passing game specialist right now in LA. So Liam Coen could bring him in as the passing game coordinator, especially if Jake Peetz is not the hire at that position as well.
Okay. Wow, great stuff. Definitely agree in terms of the Shane Waldron, Spencer Whipple stuff. Spencer Whipple, I don't think I had heard his name until I saw that video of Cohen and Kirk talking on Monday. But he said he was at UMass for a while and has just been steady rising. He joined the Cardinals in 2019 as an offensive quality control coach, then became assistant wide receivers coach. Obviously, he spent time with Christian Kirk in that role. Then pass game coordinator, and now he's a pass game specialist. And so it's funny because it's a lot of promotions. It's 4 promotions in 5 years, and yet pass game specialist still doesn't seem that high on the list. And
That's
so,
like the new trendy thing, like the McVay tree. Like they like brought this to the NFL. Like passing game specialist is basic because that's what Udinsky up in Minnesota, who, by the way, would love for the Jaguars to request him. Heard some great things around the league about the 28-year-old offensive guru, who also was a finalist in Seattle for the offense coordinator job. Heard some great things about him. My concern there is that he's probably going to end up in Philly, where he's from, when Kellen Moore becomes the next head coach of the New Orleans Saints.
yeah.
But I would love to see the Jaguars try to pluck from the Minnesota tree there as well. Another name to watch is Chris O'Hara, who also was here in Jacksonville previously. Have on good intel that there's some interest in coming home to Duval. He's currently an offensive assistant, a senior offensive assistant in Minnesota. Wouldn't be surprised to see Liam Coen pluck from that KOC tree. On the offensive side of the ball, as much as we may talk about some of the defensive hires here too. Again, for the sake of time, Gus, I'm going to kind of run through some other names I have here. If the Kevin Carberry situation gets wonky, you can't get him in as OC, even if you do bring him in as your OC. Andy Dickerson, I think, would be a name to watch, who was also in Los Angeles as the offensive line coach under Sean McVay when Liam Coen was there. They overlapped all 3 seasons from 2018 to 2020 before he followed Shane Waldron to Seattle. He was fired by the Cleveland Browns last year, but that was after 3 largely successful seasons with Pete Carroll and the Seahawks. So that certainly could be a name to watch. I previously mentioned Cadillac Williams as a potential hire at running backs coach because, number one, Liam loves to pluck guys from college, and number two, Cadillac played for Sean McVay and John Gruden, down in Tampa Town in the mid 2000s. But any number of hires could go that way at the running backs position. And of course, everyone's favorite hire on this staff, the one that you're all going to be like running around yelling and screaming. And Lauren Brooks got pissed at me because I called her out and I said, I know what you're about to say. Everyone's calling for this. This time a year ago, Liam Coen went out into the SEC and plucked a name that he had never worked with, but he loved his game, in Brian McClendon, the longtime SEC wide receivers coach at Georgia and South Carolina. And I envision he will do something similar in going to the Bayou and plucking Cortez Hankton and bringing him back home to Jacksonville, where he played, and reuniting him with his protege, one Brian Thomas Jr. as the wide receivers coach.
That'd be pretty sweet. All right, Mia, for the sake of time, you want to give an official prediction for offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator? I can do the same, but.
Yeah, well, so I also got some names on defense, so we're going to keep it going.
All
right. We're emptying the tank here. So, okay, offensive side. Brian Picucci is another name I want y'all to watch. So that was one of the other hires that Liam made in Tampa, assistant offensive line coach, also currently being held hostage. He followed Liam from Maine to Kentucky, now to the Bucks. Like, he's been with him everywhere. That's his like football like uncle. So he's gonna find a way to get him to Jacksonville. Like, I'm sorry, like you can't hold that guy hostage. Another name to watch, just like throwing darts at it right now, would be Nick Charlton, who worked with Liam at Maine. He was the special teams coach, the wide receivers coach, and eventually became the head coach at Maine. He's currently a run game specialist and offensive assistant in Cleveland. Could see him getting a title as a passing game specialist potentially here in Jacksonville because of that Maine tie. To the defensive side of the ball we go, where the staff that I've built out, Gus, is for Anthony Campanelli. And why? Because Anthony Campanelli will bring Don Brown as his senior defensive assistant. And there we go. There's your old head in the room, folks. With
full circle.
Decades of experience. Liam Cohen's former boss now comes to work for Liam Coen. Now, let's run through some of the names on his staff. Some of these names he has traveled with, some he has not. The defensive line coach situation would be very, very fascinating to me. The 2 names I have written down are both currently employed by the University of Southern California. Eric Henderson was the longtime Rams line coach before taking the co-defensive coordinator position under Lincoln Riley. We know that Lincoln Riley is kind of on unstable ground, but maybe he's not at USC. I don't really know. Point is, Eric Henderson has a ton of respect in the league, but would he be willing to leave a coordinator position at USC to go back to being a defensive line coach, not a defense coordinator in the NFL? If it's not him, perhaps it's his defensive line coach at USC, Sean Nua, who, wait for it, worked for Don Brown at Michigan alongside Anthony Campanelli. So file those 2 away. Again, for those of you who are just joining us, shout out to our stats and info department. And by that, I mean Bo Valentine, my boyfriend Kevin, who largely helped me put this staff together. There is one name that I disagreed with him on, and that's at linebackers coach. So he has Tem Lakabu, who has Jeff Hafley, Greg Schiano ties as the linebackers coach, longtime linebackers coach.
Mm-hmm.
Gus, please remove the curtain. Let the listeners know. When I discovered Liam Cohen's Instagram last week, that he hasn't posted on in 5 years, by the way, but he did post when he was a member of the Los Angeles Rams pretty frequently. And there's a picture after they won the NFC. I forget if it was the NFC Championship game or the NFC West. And there's a picture of the entire coaching staff celebrating. And there's a guy front and center, old head, veteran defense coordinator, a guy who some way or another somehow got attached to the McVay tree, and they're all best buds, despite the fact that there's like a 30-year age gap there. This individual is named Joe Barry. He was the defense coordinator at Green Bay. Ironically, Jeff Hafley, Anthony Campanelli's uncle, football father, replaced him. Joe Barry also, for those of you who watched The Book of Baselli, The Book of Bo, our documentary podcast that we did at 1010XL 3 years ago. Joe Barry is a longtime friend of one Don Anthony Baselli. So yeah, Joe is currently the linebackers coach at Miami. So I'm not sure what it would take to get him out of that contract. Probably an assistant head coach title. But
he's linebackers coach and run game coordinator in Miami.
Yeah. So it's probably going to take an assistant head coach title. There's people who disagree with me. I have no insight on this, folks. I talked to Joe last year at the combine. Actually, I talked to him before the Jags-Dolphins game. That's the last time I've talked to him. So, like, I don't have any intel, but I'm just here to tell you the McVay tree and Liam, like, that's their guy. He's a former DC, and his childhood buddy is in line for a nice little job here. So I'm just throwing it out there. It may not happen. This is solely me connecting dots. And I won't come off of it until it's not a reality, because I saw that picture and I texted you and I said, oh my God, like, how did no one tell me this? Like, I was like, there's him and Liam hugging it out. And I was like, this can't be real. So I have Joe Barry coming as the linebackers coach and assistant head coach, but again, could be off. So Tem Lakabu, a name to watch there. Some other names. Chris Hewitt just resigned as the longtime secondary coach in Baltimore. He has some ties to Campanelli, Don Brown, some other people. There's a lot of rumors there that he is probably going to be the defense coordinator at Rutgers. And I believe that, but that's just another old head perhaps to look at. Another riser in the field, I'm going to butcher his name, is Matu Arawau. He's the Dolphins cornerbacks coach. So I have him coming as a secondary coach and passing game coordinator. And yeah, got a bunch of other names, but the big one you guys need to know, I have Campanelli, Don Brown. Time is a flat circle. Liam gets to hire his mentor to come here and be his mentor once again as a head coach in the National Football League.
It is all about who you know in pretty much any job industry, I feel like, but including this one. And so, Mia, based on what you said, I'm going to say, do you have any more names that you want to get through?
I do, but I'm going to spare you guys and probably save them for a rainy day.
Okay, sounds good. I'm going to go ahead and predict that the Jaguars are going to hire Nate Shieldhouse from the Rams as their offensive coordinator and Aubrey Pleasant, the Rams defensive pass game coordinator. I'm going to go with two Rams as my official predictions. But what do you think, Mia?
I like it, honestly. And I wouldn't be surprised, because you want to know what? Both those guys have the juice. And that is the one message that has been echoed to me by people around the league, people at the Miller Electric Center. Shad Khan wants the juice. And both of those guys have the juice and are up-and-coming names. Once upon a time, Aaron Glenn was an up-and-coming first-time head coach. And now we act like he's been around, forever and like he's an old head. And it's like, no, like, it's okay to try the young, up-and-coming mind.
Totally. Absolutely. All right. Well, we'll be interested. It'll be interesting to see how this coaching staff shapes up. We'll definitely be back with updates on that on the Tuesday show at noon next week with a guest TBD.
Rick Ballew's going to join you, I think, is the plan. Right. So the truth teller will be dropping truths.
Absolutely. And then Mia will be back on Thursday. And then we should be getting some extra programming coming after the Super Bowl, but we'll have more information on that next week. So until then, thanks again to Mia for joining today. Thanks to everyone for listening. Have a good weekend.